We will open the joint City Council, Planning Commission, and Design Review Board work session, Wednesday, September 7th. I need an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Okay. We always start with our public comment. Anybody in the audience have a comment? Anybody online? I think it's all members. No? Okay. Not seeing any comments, we will move on to our topic. Jeff.
Yeah, so this will be joint meeting number 5, and packet was distributed, and so got Marcy here with us. Keith is online, I believe, and they'll lead us through this joint work session. I'm happy to have everyone in attendance, I think, and that's great on such a beautiful day. And so excited also to keep this project moving forward, and we'll talk a little bit about next steps, I think, as part of this or towards the end of this. So Marcy, if you want to just take it away.
Gonna take the podium. Want to start the presentation this week?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. You've made a really strong commitment to this project. We're at the 5th. It's the penultimate of our session for the code audit process. We're winding down to have a report to you by the end of the year that details exactly where we found issues with your code and what we prioritize for fixing. So I'm going to go through a presentation that's kind of a summary of what we found and talk about how we're going to disseminate little digests of additional information over the few weeks between this meeting and the meeting on October 12th, which will be our last meeting under the audit phase. It's challenging when we're working on a project like this where there's so much information that we want to share with you, and it can't all be done in meetings like this. That's partly why we send out the packet. But even with the packet, I try to be careful with how much information we put in that. So the purpose of these digests, which I'll detail further into the presentation between now and October, is to give you capsules of additional information focused on a topic. Because I understand you're all busy. You have a lot of other duties to do, city duties besides a life. And there's a lot of information here. So I'm hoping this will work. But of course, we're going to have plenty of time to discuss the project here. I'm only going to present probably for a third of the time that we're together, and the rest of the time we can have a conversation. So the agenda is pretty much covering some of the things in your packet in a bit more detail, but I've also added in some an outline of the code audit report that we will be producing by the end of the year, so we can talk about what we think it should consist of and hear your feedback. I'll also be talking about the what the code rewrite, should you agree to go forward with that project, a separate project, what that would look like, how it would unfold in 2023. So if we could go to the third slide in. I always start here with a presentation about where we've been and where we are today. This was 4 task projects that consisted of audit, preliminary concepts. We've had a number of joint meetings that were not part of the original scope, but it became clear that it was very important to have the 3 groups who have to deal with the code together in the same room, talking about and hearing about the issues. And it's also really important for us to hear everyone who takes part in the process of approving projects to tell us what they see as the problems. So we added those 6 joint session meetings, as you might recall. They were not part of the original project, but they've been kind of like the backbone of the work, I think. So we're now in the phase of concepts. What the code audit consultant people call a concept is kind of like, here's a kind of an issue that you have with your code. Here's a kind of a fix. And it's intended to be a higher level way of understanding the problems and the fixes. And we're going to head into the end of the year with recommendations. So if we could go to the next slide, just to remind you of all the things that we have done. I mentioned the community and joint commission engagement, the sixth.
Recording in progress.
Got some background.
That's my.
Committee discussions. You'll remember a village community that we sent out just for the joint commission. And then we opened that to the public. We really got quite a good response back. We talked about the results of that. And at the request of the joint commission, well, we held a village character visioning work session a few months ago. And that also was not really part of the code audit technical, but it's been very important because that is kind of a key issue for how the code is working or not within Cannon Beach. We had a meeting in July with a group we call the CAAC, or the Code Audit Advisory Committee, which consists of public works director and assistants and emergency responders, people who are out there enforcing the code on the ground, the building permit expert and your land use attorney. And we shared with them the information that we've been creating, same information that we've talked to you about, and we've got their reaction, which was another side of all of the issues, to hear what it's like for the people who actually have to tell the applicants I need the code, et cetera. So that's been an equally valuable part of our process. And we've had numerous project management meetings with consultants and staff. We have had site tours and done interviews. So now we're coming down to the last two sessions, this one and the one on October 12th. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I realize it's a little hard to read, but I'm going to talk about the methodology that we used. And I don't think this will be new to you. We basically asked what's not working, what are the fixes, and our goal is at the end of the year to have an action plan to complete the fixes, ones that we think are the most important, and also a timetable for how to fix the things that are kind of most urgent first and other things in order. We think it'll take a year. Our methodology was to identify these different issue areas: clerical, structural or organizational, administrative issues, which are about really how, that's a big topic. It's about who makes what decision at what point, which body touches the decision. It's a lot about what type of review a project gets and who participates in that review. And then policy issues, which are also very, very big. It's kind of the whole world for Cannon Beach, because the policy is how does your code lead to the built result that's part of the vision. And what we have leaned on a lot, because it was our mandate, was what does the comprehensive plan say about your vision? And as we've said repeatedly through the course of the project, a lot of the project is, does the code stand up to the comprehensive plan? Is the zoning code implementing the vision that's articulated in the comprehensive plan? And I'll say it now, but I'm going to say it later too, that we've identified two big gaps, which I know you're all aware of. One is there's the actual words in the comprehensive plan, and then there's the perception of what the comprehensive plan says. And it's a big, kind of dangerous gap. And then there's also what the comprehensive plan says and what the zoning code actually puts into action. I'll give a couple of examples when we get to that point of the presentation, but I just want to highlight those are two big gaps that we've identified that we think need to be fixed kind of right away. So the types of fixes that we've identified, they tend to fall into reorganize. Reorganizing your code actually will make it easier to use, understand, for everybody to understand. It's going to simplify things. There's a lot of repetition. Our vision for reorganization actually brings the subdivision code and the zoning code together. This is kind of a best practice for codes these days. And your code is, 20 years old, so it needs that updating. Fine tuning existing provisions is the second type of fix. That would be fine tuning things that people don't think are working well, but not abandoning the approach altogether. And then introducing some new provisions or approaches like form-based. We talked about a couple of meetings ago. So the outcome for all of this is a prioritized list and timeline for action, a comprehensive list of issues and recommended fixes. And if we could go to the next slide, please. This is what we have been using inside our team and sharing with staff to understand exactly. I don't expect you to read this. I'm putting this up here because I want you to see the magnitude of issues that we've identified. We're going through every single section and subsection of every title that has to do with land use planning. So that's mainly the subdivision code and the zoning code. And they're in a big spreadsheet that we list out the issues that need to be fixed and possible ways to approach them. But this is more of the matrix that we've used to identify issues having to do with each section. It goes on for pages and pages, and it's been really key to our work. So now I'd like to talk about, if we could go to the next slide, some of the representative fixes. As I mentioned, reorganization is a relatively policy-free task that we think is really useful to do, to combine Title 16 and 17 to simplify your definitions, because right now the definitions, the way they're structured in the code, they're kind of like each their own little chapter, and that's just very cumbersome. Displaying information using more tables and graphics. This also would lend itself to a more form-based approach that we talked about. If you, for instance, saw all of the development standards, that is the setbacks or the height of a certain zone, and you could actually see those in a table on a single page, so you could compare them to each other, you could kind of see visually the form that results. That's not possible in the code that you have right now. You have to really go through on each chapter, kind of hold the thought in your head. And if you're thinking about the resulting form, it's really difficult for really anyone, even an expert like me in this, to kind of manage to understand what's this code actually producing physically. So that's a major goal, but it falls under the relatively policy-free category of reorganize. Then I mentioned fine-tuning existing provisions. For example, we do think that decision-making procedures could be fine-tuned. For example, we talked about a recent meeting. If a variance is regularly seen as a type 2 type decision, but it's a variance that people are repeatedly asking for, perhaps it doesn't deserve to be type 2. Perhaps that could be an administrative decision, and that would free up the planning commission, for example, from that kind of duty to more policy, to being able to take on more policy. So there are advantages to it, but while we say that procedures should be fine-tuned, that's also a very political thing. And I know decisions that we present or proposals that we present to you, those will probably become policy issues because they're very political. People feel very strongly about who gets a say in what stage of the procedure about various things. The residential, what we're calling the residential public benefits provision, is an example of fine tuning. And I described this briefly in the packet. We're going to talk about it more between now and October. But it's a proposal that mostly Jeff has crafted from his knowledge of the way these provisions work in cities he's worked in, and also blended with our knowledge about these types of provisions. It's a proposal to downscale the development capacity that's built into your code now, but reward back a certain amount of development capacity in exchange for a public benefit. And the three that are being proposed right now are saving a legacy tree, transferring development rights to save a historic building, or creating a workforce, deed restricted workforce accessory dwelling unit. So it's a way of not just clamping down on size, or I shouldn't say clamping down, but right sizing the size, and giving it back in exchange for something that you need. So we'll be talking about, it's not a simple type of fix, but I think it's really, really worth digging into. So we'll be talking about that more. Then the third category of fixes is introducing new provisions. And we talked about having more of a form-based approach. And this is where it doesn't necessarily change the development standards that you have, but it maybe focuses them more so that the form that's produced by the setbacks and height and different dimensional standards is more location specific, more neighborhood specific. Say along the beachfront in the presidential zone, for example, they maybe one size doesn't fit all districts or neighborhoods. And then another example of introducing new provisions would be to adopt provisions that manage parking instead of applying these parking requirements. We talked about this a couple of meetings ago, where in your downtown, because you have a kind of an old type of parking requirement provision built in, someone has to build a certain number of parking spaces in order to have a commercial use. If you tear down one of the old commercial buildings downtown, you would have to replace it with really, it's almost all parking lot now. And that, I think people don't totally understand that that's built into your code. That's just a fact. It's a yes or no. It doesn't fit your vision, or it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan says the downtown should be a small scaled mixed use area with a village character, kind of like that. But an applicant coming in actually has to cut a building down and build lots of paved area to accommodate the parking that's required. That's something I think should definitely be on the front burner to fix. You do have municipal parking. You do manage parking to some extent. And so maybe managing the parking supply that you have, fine tuning that and allowing buildings downtown to say be rebuilt to their same size, occupying the same amount of size on their lots. That wouldn't be allowed today, but could change your rules to allow it. So for further information, if you could go to the next slide, between now and October, we'll be sending out these little digests. I think they're going to be about 3 to 4 pages each to talk about 3 of these topics individually. So one that you'll get the week of the 14th of September would be about how the improved organization looks. Actually, how it looks will actually be laying the organization out for you and talking about the pros and cons. The next one would be this procedures, talking about how your procedures currently work, who makes decisions when and where, when and about what, and why you might want to change that. And the last one would be about the public benefits provision that I just described. So each of these requires a lot more detail than we can really go into this kind of packet that I send out before this meeting and in this meeting. So just expect, I hope that you'll be able to make some time to read those and then come to the October meeting with questions, comments, and feedback. And I'm going to pause right now to see if there are any questions about what I've talked about. Or
I have a question, a couple, if you don't mind. Trees and wetlands, where does that fit in your structure? Is it organizational, is it procedural, or is it new topic?
trees, I believe trees are a fine tuning.
Okay.
I think you have a pretty good tree ordinance now. But I don't know that it's working the way everybody, I'm not sure, actually, my opinion is I don't know that people know how it works, just the general public. And I do think it's possible there are places where it needs to be strengthened, perhaps. And so I think it's a thorough going over of the treatment, how it works, and where it's not working to people's expectations. That's a hot issue, but I consider that a fine tuning issue.
I'm sorry,
Fine tuning type of thing.
and wetlands also, how we
Wetlands,
manage those?
that's a policy issue.
And will both of those appear in your reports?
Yes.
Questions from the floor appropriate or not?
Sure. Like
Marcy, I was glad to see your emphasis on the parking thing. Another one, a companion issue to that would be the landscaping requirement. Again, major fire on Hemlock Street. You couldn't rebuild any of the buildings right now due to both the parking requirement and the 10% landscape, 15%, 10% landscape set aside.
That applies to all zones or just to the commercial zone?
Commercial zones. And that, you know, we need to think about a grandfather clause or something like that, because it would be a tragedy.
Right, non-conforming provisions. If you wouldn't mind telling me your name.
My name is Tim Ramey.
Okay.
Sorry.
Meet you.
Another question, if you don't mind. Except as Tim was introducing himself, I lost it. So if somebody else has a question, I'll come back to this.
But I thought the recommended listening on parking management resources, those sites were really very interesting. I think everybody's concerned about parking. I think that would behoove everyone that's involved in this to listen to those podcasts and or read the websites.
Thank you.
There have been articles circulated also, Mike, correct? I mean, among this group about restricting parking a little bit. Has that been part of your consideration?
Managing parking usually does involve restricting parking
Okay.
to some extent, but I'm not sure what articles you're talking
Well,
about.
I don't know. I thought there had been some among the people involved in the CODOX audit saying that there's communities like Canna Beach need to find some way to start cutting back on the number of tourists so that we can provide those that we entertain a good experience.
I think
And one of the ways to do it was to restrict parking in some way.
those might have been sent to us as a part of the transportation management plan, as a part of the package.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a relevant issue though. I mean,
Yeah, and matter of fact, it was an ad to the TSP, wanted more focus on parking. There've been a number of discussions at council level about parking. There's actually been a proposal in a couple of years now to experiment with timed parking that created a lot of
I would
objections.
imagine it would cause a lot of consternation, but you know, there have also been proposals about moving parking off site or out of the city and stuff like that. So there's a whole bunch in parking that has been handled by TSP, but I would think that we would need some code modifications to accommodate them. And I don't know if you'd had full access to that information. If you haven't, you should work with Jeff and get a copy of the TSP.
No, I have.
There's a whole history there, that would be helpful for you.
Actually, can I ask a kind of a quick procedural question, I guess, because that's what we're focusing on here is when you started, you were talking about the fact that we're finding the problems and then finding suggestions for fixing the problems. As we're in that process of working on the fixes, when new ideas come in or a different direction outside of the box kind of stuff comes in, that's part of our discussion, correct?
Correct.
So in the process, if we notice for some reason that you've missed a spot, we can slug in a new one, correct?
If I could just clarify, make sure I understand what you're saying. This is a code audit. We're identifying the problems and we're going to suggest a bunch of fixes by the end of the year.
Yeah.
then if you go forward with the actual code rewrite, it is possible all the way along that we find that our proposed fix actually, people have a second thought, or they want to look at that more closely, or they want to, you know, the fix that was identified as part of the code audit isn't the right one. There are others, so that's built into the code rewrite process.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks
And
for bringing that up.
comes with that also is the fact that, oh, wow, your fix is something we would have never thought of. So, yeah. Great.
Mickey has her hand up.
Who's that? Sorry.
Mickey.
Vicky, please.
Online. Just a quick, another issue to potentially flag. An issue recently came before the Planning Commission related to public notice and request for notice related to projects. And we discussed as the Planning Commission, when is the appropriate time to deal with that? And we were mentioning the fact that this code audit is occurring. Are you looking at any of the provisions related to notice? And I know that it would be super helpful for us to understand how other cities do notice for people who've requested notice. I don't believe our code currently requires it, so it would be a new piece.
That is, thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely bundled into the procedures piece, the notice, public notice, and all of that. And I agree with you that it would be helpful for any city like yourselves who are going to be going through kind of rethinking how the procedures work to understand how other cities deal with that. So that would be part of our, when we get into, it probably isn't part of the code audit recommendations to tell you all the different ways that cities are dealing with that, more of a sampling of ways, and then we would explore that further when we actually undertake the code rewrite.
Okay, thanks.
That also similarly came up last night because of the appeal timeline for when a permit, 190 days or 120 days. So yeah, we're going to talk about that a lot.
Marcy, what's your experience? One of the things that you suggested, and I would be all for less work in front of the Planning Commission, is the idea that the Planning Commission potentially could shift its focus from a lot of these appeals, say a type 2 permit, to more policy issues. What's your experience in small communities like this of what the Planning Commission's role typically is? I know a lot of people in the community like the ability to have a say in some of these projects and don't want to see so much administrative control. But I don't have any experience in terms of what's typical for that, and whether it would be good to move toward that, or this is a system that is done in other communities. And
Sure. Can I reveal that I served on a planning commission for 5 years of my life? So,
oh, bless you.
I served on a planning commission whose sole role was legislative. We didn't even have a quasi judicial role. Those are two separate kinds of duties that a planning commission undertakes. But small cities usually don't have that ability to split off legislative only. But I do think that getting the planning commission kind of out of the business of reviewing every single variance would allow you to undertake more legislative policy, really serious, big type of projects that might take 8 months to a year to do. An example that we talked about earlier is the form-based approach. The form-based code is one where the development standards are decided up front in a legislative process. They're worked through and detailed out. It can take a really long time to create a form-based code for a city, but the Planning Commission usually undertakes the process of studying all of the details and deciding what the dimensional standards should be. And then it becomes not a decision after that point. If it becomes legislated code that buildings will be shaped in this way and oriented this way in these areas, that becomes a package of legislative amendments that are made. After that, supposedly the Planning Commission can have the confidence that they thought through every detail, and now it's up to administrative review. So a form-based code usually comes with clear and objective criteria and an easier application process for the builder, architect, or whomever is applying for a development permit, because it could be undertaken by staff, because they're simply checking the boxes that the planning commission decided were appropriate. Does this make sense? That's an example of taking a whole set of decisions, making it a big legislative project, and then kind of like fixing it. And after that, the actual review procedure can be administrative.
It does make sense. It seems, and maybe I just haven't put the pieces here together, but inevitably we're not going to cover all the bases. As a group, we'll miss something just because, you know, a lot of the stuff that comes before us is, you know, my eave overhangs 3 inches, 5 inches, 8 inches. And, you know, the person wants to do something that doesn't fit within our code as existing. And I imagine it wouldn't fit into the new code, however it looks. What happened? Do we just have a hard, well, if you're already non-conforming, it's a hard no? Or what is the process when you get to that gray area where something doesn't, where it's fallen out of anything we've written and tried to cover?
Yeah, I describe it as trying to split out those things that need a full decision-making public process to, so if someone's eave overhangs a certain number of feet, decide how many feet somebody could overhang and get an administrative approval. Decide how many feet is too much and would need a full different kind of decision where more people are involved and it's more public process. I think you can still split out these things, the things you would accept, like these are just not that important, or they're important, but we're always probably going to say the same thing about this one decision. So let's just put it on the books. And then anything that deviates from that, we still want to review. I still think there's a way of parsing out things that can be administrative. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah, it's just, you said it's going to take a long time, and I could see that taking a long time. There's just so many little places to.
We are going to tell you what we think your priority is. Obviously, you can't do that process on every issue. So there's some things you're going to have to focus on. I mean, the size of structures, clearly a big issue, or the character and the pressure that you're feeling from new growth and the willingness of applicants to litigate and all of that puts you in a situation where I think a lot of those, it tells us, it makes it clear to us that our recommendations will include things that are about form. I think those are going to be high on our priority list. The first stages of your code rewrite, for example.
Mhm.
Can I make a statement here?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. Both Astoria and Warrenton have provisions, and I can't remember about your code, but our code, but the ability to grant administrative variances to things like setbacks for eaves or heat pumps or even structures on tight lots, I think, works very well in both of those cities. And, and if the public wants to get involved or a neighbor wants to get involved, they appeal it to the planning commission and the administrative decision. And then, you can keep the appeal fee, fairly low. So it can be a public thing, or it gets into the public realm. But I think giving the staff the ability to make those decisions is really important. The other thing I want to mention about form-based design is Design Review Board's been talking about this a bit, and I really think it's wise to really follow this down. It's to its natural conclusion. The most obvious example that I can think of about form-based design is, snout houses and that's a big thing in Portland, but houses with their garage out front. That's just one example, but there's plenty of examples of form-based design that I think really should be put into play. And I'll just throw, as long as I'm talking, I'll throw in something about parking. I spent a lot of time downtown in the bars and on the tennis court. And, since the pandemic, there, many of the parking lots have been filled up with tables and chairs and that sort of thing. And I cannot see any significant change in parking, the lack of parking or availability of parking in the city with all of those little parking lots like the Ecola Seafoods, Bill's Tavern, Seasons. Those are the places I go, but it's just insane to have these 4-lot. It's not insane. It's outdated, as Marcy says, to have these 4-lot parking lots, on a 50 by 100 foot lot, when that land could be used for landscaping and a larger building and, providing amenities. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
Marcia, just one more comment. I mean, you kind of defined the situation where people are suing every time they don't like our decisions, right? So, we're caught between the legislature and the court right now, and this clear and objective thing isn't something we can wait a year on. I don't think. I think we really need to figure that out much more quickly than that, or we're going to find ourselves repeatedly in court. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a little bit more urgency on some of these than, sometime over the next year. And I think Jeff would agree. I don't know how we kind of move up the time. For instance, on these first 3, I would think that, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get into your thinking, but the form-based proposals would be right off the top of the list, because that's kind of where we're going to see a lot of the appeals. So just a thought.
Yeah, I agree with you that the clear and objective, making things that are not clear and objective right now, making them clear and objective, but also while meeting your aesthetic and character standards. That's not an easy task, but it's a high priority. And we're actually experts at that. So that's something I think it'll be one of our first recommendations too.
Question about form-based process. In theory, wouldn't that limit the amount of accessibility to variances and conditional uses? Or couldn't it? Being clearer with what we prefer would limit the fact that, okay, I want to add another 10 inches to my eave. No, you can't. You can't get a variance just to add 10 inches to your eave. That would, to me, be a form-based decision if we say it ahead of time.
I'd like to hear what.
I would just say on that, I mean, the way I'm thinking or understanding what you're saying, Sam, is that I would think, no, you're always going to have the ability to for a variance request. And so I see it more as like giving it the clear and objective pathway, and then how the state code has an alternative pathway. The alternative pathway is that kind of more variance, conditional or whatever that might be. But the clear one would be the form-based code one, like you said. And then they don't want to do that. Well, you might have an alternative pathway. It doesn't force you automatically into a variance request, but give you something more like we're doing.
Okay, well, I'll save that for the form-based thing when we really get into that.
It seems like I think you're right, though. Just having this conversation is going to clear up a lot of the language that's unclear now, that puts it in front of the planning commission and design review. I think that just makes sense.
If we get more of the code down to the point that it's clear and objective, it's able to be administered without going to the planning commission, it will free up the planning commission and the planner to be more proactive in this, in the looks of the city, the development of the city, rather than reacting to applicants that just overpower us. So if we can get where those become more routine, then I think we could look at longer term planning issues, which we don't get time to do now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know, I don't think we do any planning. I think paralegal is what I am.
Yeah. We spend all our time responding to appeals.
And I think a lot of it is being driven by this very conversation. If I'm a developer and I see this coming down, I got a set of known versus a set of unknown coming at me. I'm going to try to
Start hurrying it up.
Yeah, run it through. So I think it's probably just a natural progression.
Were there any more comments? I think is it Mike that was
Online.
on Zoom?
Mike Morgan had a comment.
Yeah, Mike was.
Were there any more comments about this or questions? Okay,
Go ahead.
I hear none. So I'll move on. If we could go to the next slide. For the next couple of slides, I wanted to just talk about exactly what the it's actually 3 slides, but what the final report is going to consist of. So I'm sharing with you the outline as we see it in our minds. Outline of the audit report. First of all, we'll be talking about that a code audit is a generic thing that consultants or planners do for cities. It's often done, every 2 years, every 10 years, and some cities never get around to it, and some cities get around to it after 20 years. So we'll be talking about why it's important to do this. Also, that we kind of customize the generic code audit job for Cannon Beach. As you know, we said, let's look at what's the relationship between the city's comprehensive plan and the zoning code. Are those two things, is the zoning code, which is supposed to be an implementing ordinance of the comprehensive plan, is it actually doing that job? But we also have been looking at what's the relationship between the state land use program and your development ordinance. As you know, that's why we have brought up and repeatedly this clear and objective provision and some other things that the state requires. There is a state land use system. I think it works very well. I mean, some of you actually have been here from the beginning. You're involved in it. And we live in a state that has a really good land use program. I think one of the things that Cannon Beach could do is rely on the land use program to work. But there's still many, many local choices that can be made even while you're conforming with the state land use system. And that also helps fend off litigation, because you're not doing anything unusual that is litigatable. So we'll be talking about that in this introduction. We'll also be talking about how we're addressing it according to those 4 categories: clerical, organization, administrative, and policy, and how those 2 things are sometimes hard to separate. For example, Mike, you were asking about what about wetlands? Well, that's a policy issue, but it could also have administrative and organizational issues embedded in it. We'll be talking a lot about what we learned in this process, and to some extent itemizing all of the meetings and the feedback that we've collected. But I wanted to kind of go through a high level view of what we will be talking about in terms of what we see as not working today. Development standards that govern government development shape and size are out of date. That's pretty clear to us. You have a development envelope that's allowed by all of your zoning standards right now, that's probably, well, it's clearly resulting in buildings that people think are inappropriate. It was never tested before because people would build small things in them, but that's not true today. You have some outdated practices that are working against the comprehensive plan objectives. We did talk about parking already, but another really, really important one is residential zoning that doesn't allow for housing options or workforce housing. I think that's also going to be kind of front burner recommendation of ours. Areas that need validation or fine tuning, it's clear to me that there's a lot of concern about trees, rightfully so. Does the tree ordinance really not work? I don't think it's true. I don't think it's understood yet. And so a lot of what the code audit tries to do is explain how things work now, so you can kind of really dissect where it's failing, at what point in the process or in the standards is it failing. And we intend to subject the tree provisions to that. The approval process, similarly, I think a lot of people may not totally understand the roles of the different, like how, as Miki was saying, how do other cities deal with clear and objective and then a variance? Do they all subject a variance to planning commission review, or no, do some do it in a different way? Do they use the appeal process as kind of an outlet? So understanding those systems and how they work will be something we talk about quite a bit as well. And then where local decision-making bodies have choices and where the land use system governs, the clear and objective standards is something we've talked about. But there are also things like, even in your own city, there are kind of building code issues that have to do with fire life safety, and public works issues that have to do with maintaining clear rights of way. Those are really not planning commission decisions to be made. Those are things that these technical people in your city staff take care of. And I don't think that that's always clear too. So we're going to be trying to clarify and comb out the things where you don't really have a choice, but you have plenty of other choices over here, and you should be focused over there. So next page, please. We're again customizing the code audit type of project to your city. And what we want to achieve is a path through the code rewrite that maintains what's important to you, but is faithful to the comprehensive plan goals, but complies with state law, and also something that can stand for the next 20 years, because that's probably what we're talking about. Or in setting up a procedure where you could regularly address things that you missed the first time around, though, but do it on a regular schedule. So the recommendations will consist of a comprehensive listing of all the issues and the fixes, and a prioritization option. Next slide. I just want to end this section with this. I mentioned it earlier, but we have noticed these giant gaps. What the comprehensive plan says in words, and then what people think it says. I think that there's been a lot of conversation about the comprehensive plan and village character through this project. I think it's mostly been productive, because I think it's helped people understand, maybe look at the comprehensive plan, again, or for the first time, and see exactly what it says. It's a very sound document, and we think it should stay. We think we should make the zoning code work with it. So that's the other gap, is what the comprehensive plan mandates and what the zoning code implements in reality are two very big gaps as well. So I think the middle path that we recommend for Hampton Beach and the code rewrite is to close those two gaps. Now, are there any questions at this point?
I had one that popped into my head. I mentioned that state law, how we adapt our ordinances to fit state law so that we are within those clear and objective ordinances or criteria. When we get it all written and done and working, and then the state changes something, do we have to adopt to their new change, or do we stick with what we committed to when we Because they change things every once in a while.
Every once in a while, it's not often though, but yes, you do have to comply with their changed rules. I mean, for example, sometimes a city like yours can be small enough that they don't have to comply. The House Bill 2001 middle housing rule didn't apply to cities under a certain size. But those rules were changed. Personally, I think they're extremely important. That there should be, it's basically allowing someone to build duplexes on every lot that contains a single dwelling today. And in some areas, build additional types of housing like triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters and row houses. That's important because we're in the middle of a national housing crisis. It's especially acute here in Cannon Beach. Now, Cannon Beach doesn't have to comply with that one, though. But I still think it's really important. And now there are rules coming about, they have a lot to do with fire resilience. And there's an important rule that cities will have to comply with. And I'm not sure, since the final rules haven't been adopted yet, what's candidate cities, which cities will be forced to comply or not. I shouldn't use the word forced because I don't feel that way about these. I think these are good, valuable rules. One of them is that there should be street connectivity, especially in forested areas, so that emergency response vehicles can get to a fire. I mean, believe it or not, that's not a requirement. It's not a uniform requirement. And I think things like that are important and shouldn't necessarily be left to local discretion. But there's still a lot of choices within those broad rules to do things that are very local.
I guess I was just getting kind of a 30,000 foot idea on that. I know of, as another example, like we have talked about, our tree ordinance is very important to us. But if we were to adopt Colorado's tree ordinance, you could not have a tree within 30 foot of your house in the rural districts because of fire scare. And that's their fire code. So that would mean all the houses on our bordering the timberland would have to have something similar. I don't think Oregon would ever adopt something like that, but they could because fire's becoming quite a concern. That kind of thing, then we're okay, wait a minute, that really contradicts our desire to maintain trees.
But you do, because of the Oregon land use system, we have rural land and city land. And it's assumed that that land within an urban growth boundary is serviceable by, say, a fire,
Again, I'm just using a ballpark kind of.
I mean, yeah, it's a good example to bring up, but it also helps me point out that the Oregon land use system has a lot of built-in protections. A rural, that would probably apply to rural land, but we're not talking about rural land. We're talking about a city with an urban growth boundary. It's always good conversation.
No, I'm really excited about these two big gaps. Let's fill them.
Well, I thought there was progress tonight because I think I heard you say our comprehensive plan is fine. It wasn't that one thing you wanted to accomplish out of this? Somebody, to look at it and say, it does what we want it to do.
There is a couple little tweaks in there that I think are out of date, but that's because they mention things that are already done or something that we just would never do anymore. So other than that, but yes.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't undertake a rewrite of your plan at some point in the future. It's a very important community effort to reset the vision.
Mm-hmm. Copy on this.
Okay, no more questions. So let me just end by talking about what would the code rewrite look like if we were to move into 2023 with this. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, let's do the next slide actually. What we're thinking is a 4-step process. And the first step is kind of simple clerical thing. It's actually a major step because we want to reorganize the existing code provisions, that is combine 16 and 17 into a new structure, eliminate all duplication, and also table out a lot of the development standards the way we're talking about, that would make them easier, lend themselves more to a form-based approach. Now, this doesn't involve changing the language at all, but it would give us a much easier kind of template to then enact all the other changes on. We can talk later about how you would do that. It's been mentioned that some cities can adopt that new organization. They can redact the old and adopt the new organization. It doesn't change any of the way the policies work, but it just changes the organization, and then you amend it from there. But in any case, the next step would be to identify all of those amendments to the code provisions. This is where we literally go through and we say this change here for this reason. And then we prioritize them. And then we literally go through the act of amending them, which is a track change edit process, what we call adoption ready amendments. So that's all set. Let me go to the next slide because the schedule is as important as what we're proposing to do here. We're proposing that for the first 4 to 6 months, we create this code rewrite adoption draft. And then there's a 6 to 8 month process of actually adopting it, during which time there could be these work sessions and identifying things we hadn't thought about, issues that you want to be addressed more fully or differently. But that's consists of the classic work session and hearing under the Planning Commission, and then a work session and hearing under City Council. And we budgeted this out at a certain amount. This is kind of your basic code rewrite. It doesn't involve a lot of political things, which we know are likely to come up. That's why there's a range to kind of cover what we think we might see here. First of all, I'm curious to know what people think about the process, the steps that we've identified, and also the schedule. Does this reasonable? Does it raise other issues?
So are these amounts already in our budget? Because our fiscal year.
Currently we have code audit budgeted for 60,000.
Okay.
We likely need to amend the budget to allow for.
Nancy has her hand up.
Go ahead.
You're muted, Nancy.
When you say that the code rewrite, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean rewriting the actual ordinances that are involved in the code, or does that mean just redrafting the reorganizing the code as it is now?
The code rewrite means rewriting the provisions of the code.
So explain that a little more. What do you mean by that?
We would actually change language to be closer to what we think you want and what the fix requires. So language changes, provisions might be deleted, other provisions might be written new and added.
So by way of example, let's say for argument's sake that everyone in this room agrees that the current 5 foot wetland setback that we have is woefully inadequate. And we wanted to move that to say 20 feet, 25 feet. Is that something we could do tomorrow, or do we have to wait the 6 to 8 month process to do that? Does it have to be in conjunction with the entire code being rewritten at the same time? is there any way to handle very pressing things any faster?
There are ways to handle pressing things faster. An example of how you did that was last fall when you adopted the kind of
Track one.
accelerated track one amendments. Yes, there are ways to do things faster.
Well, and you had suggested that we follow state, which would be 50 feet, not 20 feet, right?
Can we vote on that tonight, right now?
No, but I'm just saying, I think if what you're suggesting is we start following the state rules and wetlands is a 50-foot setback, then that would be what you would be doing.
I don't know enough about that one issue to know what is the state rule. I think it varies by the type of wetlands.
Yeah.
And that means a kind of scientifically determined type of wetlands.
But Aaron and Robin are right. There are things that need to be addressed now, not in 12 months. And wetlands are one. Those buffers and also trees. There's no reason why we shouldn't have the same rule as the state. You cut a tree, you replace a tree. It's real simple.
I'm not sure the state has rules.
Out there in the forest, you cut down a tree, you replace them.
So one of the things that I think will be something you probably will.
I know, we can make that rule internal.
I think one of the things you'll probably need to discuss as part of next month's session is just this. Because once you start splitting off tracks and splitting off your meeting time and your resources for making changes, it delays the final and inevitable code audit. So every time you do a track one, track two, track three, it takes us, it's not simply like you said, it was a great comment, you can't vote tonight. The state, speaking of requirements, has notice requirements that we have to abide by, and that entire process, just even those track one changes, still took probably a 6-month process to do. You know, so every time you do that, you have to go through the state notice requirements process, which everybody wants to do, but that's what slows it down. It also takes our time, your meeting time, everyone's time to do that process when it needs to also be concentrated on these kind of changes. So I'm just saying, in your future discussions, when you start talking about splitting off things and some things are more important than others, well, if you do start going down that route, that's why you need, as part of this, to prioritize. And I think that's what Marcy's saying. Part of her steps are to prioritize which one most.
There would be nothing to prevent a citizens group from coming in and proposing a code change that says,
exactly,
we're going to move the buffer. There's nothing about this code audit that would prevent the planning commission from considering it if it were raised properly.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. But that's still the same thing I just spoke about, right? Whether it's a citizen group, you guys doing it, still the same thing as what we're talking about. That's why it's great to be prioritized and organized to do any of this, because it's a long process and takes a lot of time to do and to get it right. Because once you change something, like it says, it has effects on all other things. And so I just recommend, that's part of the.
We're talking 12 months from December 31st, and I can guarantee you that developers aren't going to sit on their hands for 12 months while we figure this out. I honestly think that there are a few easy changes to our code that would give us just a little bit of leverage in these negotiations.
And that's what I'm saying you need to discuss, right? Okay.
Okay.
I'm not arguing with anyone here. Okay.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, real quick. So there's obviously a lot of appetite for changes, and I think we can see that. Where does this clear and objective thing come in? Is this going to be addressed in this 4-month window here, or is that another one of those?
No, it's part of the
changes.
Rewrite adoption draft would be to translate.
So you can get that cleared up.
Yes.
And kind of in response to what Nancy asked, maybe it's been answered here, but the rewrite would result in a ordinance that can be passed and adopted and replaces the one that currently exists. So it'd be a complete draft, not a draft, but it'd be a complete ordinance. Any one section that replaces the existing one. Be ready for adoption.
It's slightly more complicated than that. If you wouldn't mind, I can explain. We're suggesting that we start with much easier to read combined Title 16 and 17, that we literally reorganize those, we eliminate all duplication. We're able to put in front of you a newly structured code. Nothing about it has changed yet, but it's just the first step because it gives us a simpler code to work with. Then, as part of this 4 to 6 month process, we go through and we actually change all the language in it. But we're starting with a code that's been reorganized. Does that make sense?
I just want to make sure that the end product is a document that can be enacted by the council and adopted by the city.
Yes, that's the end product. There could be packages that go forward ahead of time. We'd still say that the reorganization should happen first, should be the very first step. But there might be a quicker package that goes ahead regarding a hot topic. But I will completely agree with Jeff that that's going to kind of take time away from this ultimate code audit, a code rewrite project. We think you need to rewrite your whole code from top to bottom and to deal with all of these pesky issues and really, really hot issues. We think you need to really do that. Every time a hot issue comes up, it does just delay the code rewrite a little bit. It takes a little energy away from it. Not that it's not important. And it does have, each of those cycles of adoption have their own required public notification timelines.
All right.
I'd like to speak to that.
Go ahead, Mike.
I wholeheartedly agree with Marcy and Jeff. I'd like to point out that you spent 13 planning commission meetings talking about forwarding management, and there wasn't any proposal to make an amendment to the code during that period. It was very deliberative. You just listen to every conceivable side of the issue, all the experts, and you came up with a decision. And to do the opposite is to get involved in hot button issues, and it screws up everything. I mean, I know there's a lot of passion about the wetlands right now, but this is a big project. So
I got more passion. I'm sorry.
What?
I'm sorry. I interrupted. My apologies. Please proceed.
I mean, I think you'd be foolish to, in the first place, you've got to follow procedures, and just keep your eye on the prize. That's my recommendation. I was involved in the first development of the comprehensive plan. Reinmar, was involved in the 92 code comp plan development, and I think this is the appropriate time to really do a complete job at whatever cost it's going to be. So just keep your eye on the prize, and steady as she goes, and get it done.
Thanks, Mike. Mickey?
Michelle had her hand up.
Oh, no, it's okay. Mike kind of said it.
Okay.
Didn't we have a moratorium on grading during that process on doing grading at one point?
It wasn't a moratorium.
What was that? What did we do there?
We just didn't accept any application.
Okay. I think, and I don't know where I'm at on this, but I do think there are a couple of really pressing issues that we have that have driven this conversation. We are down to just a few lots that are left in this not clear, not objective position. And, you know, to Mike's concern, if it takes too long, they're gonna ram those in. And we're gonna be faced with dealing with those with a set of outdated requirements on those lots, and things that this community has said are dear to them are probably going to be lost. And so the opportunity to protect them will be gone. So we are doing the right thing broadly, but there are specific lots right now that are the most challenging because we're frankly down to that. So I think as with these bodies together, we need to think about why are we doing this and what's important to us, because we will be past the point of being able to come back to these a few of these laws.
Clay, I totally agree with you, and Jeff and Mike, thank you for explaining the process a little bit more. I still don't understand why two things can't happen at once. In other words, if trees for Mike Bates, wetlands for myself, and trees and wetlands for everyone in this room were started tomorrow, and I'm being somewhat facetious about that, but not really. If we started that process, got the notices out tomorrow about those two specific issues, why couldn't we at the same time on Marcy's path and track do an entire code rewrite? Why can't two things happen at once?
I think I can answer that sort of. Limited resources. We only have enough resources to work on one big deal at a time. Not to use that as an excuse, it's kind of a reality. And we could, as the council and the planning commission, we could dive into it. We could have a meeting every night for 2 or 3 weeks and kill ourselves. But again, it's the few people that are actually doing all the pencil work. And that's a challenge because there's a lot of time involved in creating the documents that we have to agree on and discuss and make all the calendars and schedules. But I guess it is possible that we could do two things at once. The one issue that I would run into is while the big track is going on, we pull off and we cherry pick something off and say, we want to work on this specifically. We're slowing this one down. Everybody knows that. We're also going to have to realize that once we change this, it's probably going to get changed again because other ordinances affect each other. So if we changed one, it's going to change some hints on other ones, and this one might need to be tweaked again. So you're actually adding work to the other one. It's a long, complicated process. I understand this. I do agree that there are certain topics that we need to focus on. I don't know how many times I've asked for the heritage tree program to be moved quicker.
And it's getting closer.
Yeah, I know it's getting closer. I'm just, waiting to okay it. Because it's one of the things I want to okay before I'm gone. But one other point here. I lost it. So somebody else.
So what's the process? You were talking about, Jeff, having that discussion, this discussion that we just had next week, which is good. I think we should revisit it only to make sure that we make the right decision. But I want to make sure it's on the agenda and it's on the agenda for a decision.
But you mean next month?
For next October or whatever. Okay. So do you want to make the decision now? Is this something we decide now?
It's a work session. We can't really make a decision.
We can.
But
We can suggest.
we can get staff guided towards the direction.
Well,
You know, I happen to think that there's probably a handful of citizens in this country, in the city, so pissed off at this right now that they'll write their own code provisions. And I don't want us to stand in the way of it and say, hey, wait a minute, we got a code audit going. That's the wrong answer. So my preference is to let's pick out 3 things that are, I mean, either that or you set Clay and Mickey and me up against the wall and shoot us, because right now we're on a very weak side when we're defending what I think are the interests, I mean, applying the law in the interest of the citizens.
Will you shoot me too, just for?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Full firing squad.
Clay's point about a moratorium, I think is worth discussion. We have talked about, I know that this is probably a bigger challenge than it sounds like. And we would have to go to legal to find out where that is. My understanding, though, is if you can prove that you are going to make a decision by a certain date, moratoriums kind of can fit in. I've heard of places doing that. Whether that's legal or not doesn't mean that they did it right. But that's something we could talk about also.
Back to the Ford management. Didn't put a moratorium on it, but we said we haven't had sufficient information received on the effectiveness or the damage done by dune grading. And therefore, we authorized a study.
That's right.
To provide information we needed to administer and adopt proper ordinance.
That's right.
So moratorium, we had to wait until that study was in and the.
That's right. That was a taboo word, actually.
Accepted that.
Yeah. No.
So maybe something similar here with wetlands, that there's such a critical nature to what it is that we value here, not just us, but the whole environment, the world. And we see that there's damage being done. And we've seen it happen in other places, but it's not been evaluated, analyzed with a recommendation on how to mitigate damage to wetlands in the vicinity or adjacent to development. So I'm not aware of any study that's been done like that.
What you need, though, is to make a clear and objective statement. And the statement is, for this period, apart from applications on hand, there will be no permits granted for partition, subdivision, or building on wetlands. And when we have the study and what's done, we'll reopen it.
The lawyers will tell you you can't do that, but you tie it to why you need to wait.
Yeah.
It's not going to do it. But you have to have a good and valid reason and recognize that there is harm done by not addressing the issue.
Right.
But maybe someone could draft it so that it could be a delay in authorizing any additional development on what.
Yeah. We probably eaten up all your budget with Bill, right? Sorry. Could we have Bill?
Can I ask a question? Other than the forest lawn wetlands, what other wetlands are there in Cannon Beach?
First and Spruce,
Seventh,
Laurel.
yeah, up there. Yeah, is that where they're doing the grading up there now?
Up along
right at the intersection.
up along Hemlock.
Elk Run.
There's a lot.
Monica
And
Court.
Yeah, Mike, near you.
That's what I'm talking. And it's already, in my view, been violated once by allowing tons and tons of fill, which has filled some of that wetland.
Mm-hmm.
It's urgent. But what's our decision? I mean, what's the question? The question is, are we going to allow 2 or 3 things to go off track on a separate track?
I think the question is for Bill Kavaiusman to
That'd be
provide
my
some
question.
how can we,
find out how we could maybe put a break on the primary concerns, roll with our big project, fix those primary concerns first in the big project as we go with it. If we can. And that's the big question is there's the if we can make it legally appropriate. We'll see.
I think we can, back to the budget, we can either spend the legal budget on that or spend the legal budget to spending lawsuits at Luba and.
Yeah. Yeah, good. I think it's
The other
good.
thing is the more we can focus on getting RCs and their group, their information back to us, we can then really parse out the prioritizing, which ones are the most important, and really hammer on those in the political sense, the policy sense. Because there's no reason to do that until we have a clear and distinct delineation of all the different aspects that are changing in the code. Sorry, too many words here.
That's next month, right? That's October. Is that in October? Oh,
We got some meetings coming up. This is gonna start
okay.
rolling. It's what we asked for, is to get this rolling a little quicker.
okay. So Bill Kabizman, then we'll have a conversation with him and if that doesn't work, we can come back here next week and talk about it again, or next month.
Yep.
In the meantime, we continue this
What you're doing.
plan that you put back here.
Hi, Marcy.
Question about that. We're gonna get some presentation stuff before the 12th. I think that's what you lined out here and I just don't remember it.
Right.
I'm curious, the organizational aspect. You have kind of a model so we can understand it a little better. Because I'm so used to our old hunt and peck system that I would really like to see something that's really clear and quick to find things.
Would you mind going back to page 8, I think it is? Yeah, what I envisioned for that memo is 3 to 4 pages, but it's actually, there'll probably be a couple of tables in there. One that shows you how your code is organized right now, because like, do you know? Does everyone have that memorized? Compared with what our proposed organization would look like, just so you can see them side by side and how they work.
Right.
And you're talking about the organization memo. You didn't talk about the procedures memo, did you?
That one too, yeah.
Yeah.
On that, oh, that's, well, okay.
The goal for that is to actually map out how do your procedures work now, because I think you can't, it's hard to know why it needs to be fixed. Not everyone is on the same page about how it works today.
Are you gonna want feedback on those from us or wait until the meeting?
I'd like to get feedback ahead of the meeting. So these are going to come out on a weekly basis. And if there's feedback on them before the meeting, that's going to give us more time to respond or think through what you said. So I think I invite you to send your comments in chat about each of them. That's certainly happened before. We've gotten comments about the packet, for example. So these are little mini packets. Yeah, please, if you have comments about them before the October 12th meeting.
Good, Simon. Any other comments?
Thanks, been a good discussion.
Questions?
No.
Ready to wrap it up or do you have anything else?
Yeah, I was at the end of the presentation. And so if there's no more conversation about the coast plan here, then we can call this session quits.
7:30. There's daylight.
Marcy does good meetings. I've noticed that. She's really good at meetings.
We got out of here yesterday in 1 hour.
What'd you talk about?
If there's any other topic on that you guys want to pull up, I'm at a loss because I went and we were talking, so I didn't pay much attention, but I went to the comprehensive plan. And there are a couple things in there. They're just hawkeyed.
Such as?
And I lost it, but I will try and find a couple notes. But I agree that it is a very good document. So,
Marcia, you sent us some listening. You're going to send us some pamphlets, ideas. Do you have other suggestions for us in terms of just, I mean, it's not something we do every day, wherever. Suggestions for how to think about this, how to dive into something like this so we can come to these meetings as we start getting more specific, as prepared as we can. I mean, obviously, the stuff we deal with every day, a lot of the wetland and tree issues have been coming before the planning commission lately and coming to the council. We get to think about them in that context. But, there's a lot of other provisions that we're not diving into every day. And I don't know whether looking at, if there's another town you like, hey, this is a way they've done it really well, you should look at their code or a manual or YouTube, anything.
Well, I do recommend that podcast series that Mike was pointing at. I included just one episode of that. It's a link. Oregon Public Broadcasting put it together. And it's about the land use system. I think it's 6 episodes now. And I just sent you to the 3rd one, which was about housing.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all worth listening to just to understand what a legacy we have in the state and what a good thing the land use system is. It's good to have that background, I think, especially when you're a planning commissioner. And then the Sightline articles that my assistant Elizabeth put in there about parking. Sightline is a really good site to look at. They cover a lot of issues around housing and parking. And I think their materials very thoughtful and detailed. When it comes to wetlands and trees, I'm familiar since I work in some of these cities that have adopted tree policies, ordinances, and set up tree commissions and legacy programs, things. There's several in the metropolitan area that just recently completed their, updates, major updates to how they deal with trees in their cities. And I could put together kind of a little list of links that send you to their sites. You could study more about how they did it. And wetlands, I would actually have to reach out to them, some experts that I know, to find out how cities have dealt with that issue. But yeah, if you're interested, we could send out with these little digests a list of links and places to go read.
That'd be great.
Podcast, or do you like to read?
I drive a lot. Podcasts are great.
I think also, just as a side note, recently I was at a conference and we're not the only town running into these problems. And from what I was gleaning from the mayors that I've talked to, is they're trying their hardest to fight against the Oregon land use laws because they want to grow, they want to expand. They salivate when they talk about, I got 100 house program coming in, or the fact that, yes, we're going to take out this wetland because we can. It is an intriguing and hopeful to me that we create something that supports the history of the Oregon land use as best we can, while still maintaining our character and our aesthetic. Our limitation is literally geographic. We are lucky that we have that geographic limitation. The cities in the valley that are looking at really good farmland that they would rather pave because they want a new housing complex is concerning to me. And it's the opposite of what the Oregon land use originated, how it originated through my education, and literally. So I'm very hopeful with what we can do with this while maintaining our character. But again, we keep running into the fact that the land use laws are going to change. I don't think there is, and the legislature is going to be as resolute as they have been in the past. And we got to be really careful of this. Now, granted, that's a long ways down the road, but I think we have to be real careful. At that little speech, last chance. Comments, questions? Thank you, Marcy. You did a great job.
Thank you, Marcy.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
See you soon. We'll hear from you sooner. Okay. At that, go to the order. Do you have anything? Thank you.